Welcome back for the second season of the DDI Podcast, where we're continuing our mission to demystify the misconceptions surrounding the digital infrastructure sector. I'm your host, Mark Eels, the Vice President for Schneider Electric's Secure Power Division here in the UK and Ireland. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Spencer Lamb, Chief Commercial Officer for Kao Data, a company that's pioneering the development of sustainable data centers engineered for AI. For Spencer, and having held previous positions at a host of startups, scale-ups, telco, and data center companies, he has over 25 years' experience in artificial intelligence, high-performance computing, and the hyperscale cloud. So today, we're going to be exploring the energy and infrastructure gap and asking and questioning if the UK is truly ready for AI. Welcome again, Spencer, to the show, and thank you for joining me to kick off the second season of the DDI Podcast.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure.
So let's jump straight in here. So maybe a background intro for our listeners. Can you tell us a little bit more about Kao Data and perhaps your personal journey into the sector, and how did you become involved in data centers?
I started in, data centers as a full-time job back in 2006. But prior to that, I worked in telecommunications companies and always had something to do with telco rooms, meet me rooms, basically buildings with infrastructure of some description in them. And with all the financial institutions seeking to move out of central London with their trading platforms in the 2000s, it became clear that there was no real suitable facilities, certainly in the UK and beyond, that could facilitate that. So in my telecoms days, if you like, we were looking to refit telco rooms in around the London area to house these critical trading app platforms. I then moved to a dedicated data center company, startup called Infinity. And we did exactly that, in effect, taking on former logistic warehouses and converting them into data center buildings with concurrently maintainable electrical and mechanical infrastructure to support those trading platforms. And at that time, the financial kind of market stroke banks were the ones that were really driving that requirement and that demand. So that's kind of the early days of my experience. And then since then, the market's evolved and changed significantly. The demand has gone through the roof. I guess the big inflection point was around 2014, 15, when we saw the large cloud providers from the US seeking to deploy their cloud infrastructure in UK and beyond into Europe. Prior to that, they had tried to facilitate their cloud services from their US data centers, which wasn't suitable for customers in Europe. So that really was the time when it was the data center market started to become much, much larger with the types of deployments that they were seeking to do. And since then, we've got to a point now, I think, in the industry where we're all scratching our heads somewhat because there was no plan architected in a way that could deploy these facilities in a way that was in tune with a country's power infrastructure. And then I moved to Kao Data in 2020, and we have been really pushing and promoting the high-performance computing AI environments that we're very much seeing come to play today, specializing in that area, working with research institutions, universities, AI startups has been really interesting, certainly with the dynamic that we are all seeing in the market and in everyone's day-to-day lives of AI, and how that infrastructure, that compute infrastructure, NVIDIA's GPU technology, is really going to be shaping how we acquire land, design data centers, and build data centers, and in turn operate them in the future. So another big inflection point in the data centers journey, or the data center industry's journey, I should say.
You raised one really important point there, just around the power and the infrastructure needed to support data centers. We'll come on to that in a short while, but I do want to pick you up on the AI piece and the landscape that you're seeing, because last year, of course, the government announced a raft of measures, didn't they, to help the UK become a superpower. I think that was the words in AI. What was it? $2.5 billion in investment announced by Microsoft, a further $500 million in AI compute around that to support local, sectors that are really important to the UK, like scientists and researchers as one example. But is the UK, are we really ready for this wave of AI? And do you think, just coming back to the infrastructure point, have we got that all lined up and teed up? And can it match the ambition that we've got, do you think?
Massive question. I'll try and be succinct. I think there's many parts to the answer. Talking about the government enthusiasm to be an AI superpower, I think is separate from what we've seen from the commitments from the big hyperscalers in the investments and also the scale of what they're looking to do. I'll take that aspect first. Ultimately, Microsoft, I think, is the leader in this with respect to the big cloud providers with their Chat GPT. They are going large, forgive the term, on deploying AI and planning for AI. I think they are ahead of the game when compared to AWS and Google, though Oracle seem to be doing a pretty good job of catching up. And what they're deploying with those big investments is an opportunity to obviously earn money from the UK enterprise, government, healthcare, because they'll be providing those services as they do today for their cloud platforms, on a per core per hour basis, and they will have AI flavors within their many SKU lists of products they provide that will deliver that product to those enterprise government or healthcare organizations. And that's what we need, because otherwise, if we don't have it, those organizations can't do it. The other aspects that you highlighted is the government's ambition to be an AI superpower. Now, what that means, and comparing ourselves to the US, who are obviously the leaders in this, and then you've got the Far East, who are probably second place in this, and then you've got the Middle East, who are investing heavily in it, and then you've got Europe, who are being a bit less, I suppose from a government investment perspective, putting less public money aside to invest in it. So all those countries, all those regions their governments are buying huge amounts of NVIDIA GPU infrastructure and then deploying it and then providing access to their research institutions, their research universities, and in some cases, their startup community. I don't think the UK government is being as bold as that at this point in time. They haven't allocated sufficient funds to get anywhere near the US, the Far East, South Korea, and countries of that nature in that field.
Really interesting. And do you think then, when you think about those two dynamics that we've just been speaking about there, so that's government and the regions and their view on how we could do this and get this moving faster, from a UK standpoint, do you think the industry is leading this dynamic? It sounds like it from what you just said. The industry's leading and the government's trying to play catch up, or?
Yeah. So again, it's keeping the two separate. So the cloud providers providing their state-of-the-art AI infrastructure as a service to their customer base. I think that's very much happening and that's much needed and that's going in the right direction, and the investment has been made public and therefore moving forward. That's great. I think on the government side, I think there's some challenges there, and what the UK has been traditionally, historically very successful at with the education system that we have in place, with the red brick universities who have been fostering for many, many decades a startup culture and ecosystem. And in turn, what we create there are people who come out with very good ideas and are able to come up with concepts, startups that create those ideas. And then there's a funding and VC structure that sits around that as well to provide that seed funding to take to the next stage. What I think, in my view, is where we struggle with, and this is pretty much something that everyone in the country struggles with, is a lack of investment in infrastructure, whether that be day-to-day railways, roads, and that sort of thing. I don't think and this is a really good example, we're not investing in the AI supercomputer for the country, for those research people in those universities that they can utilize as and when they need to be able to really develop and evolve their ideas and compete potentially with what's going on in other parts of the globe, if you like. And that's going to be interesting to see whether those very bright, capable people that come out of our university system decide to stay in the UK or go elsewhere where they can access that infrastructure because those governments are providing it. So I think we need to improve that. Now, that's the compute itself, but then we've got the power and the stuff that data center developer operators do that sits underneath that. And as has become clear, we struggle significantly with that as well. And to the point where you've got the power costs in the UK, because over the last 30, 40 years, we've sold our power generation and our distribution power network to other countries, other businesses, in effect. We don't control that anymore, so we can't control power pricing. If you compare ourselves to France, where they've kept it all in, and obviously France has got its own interesting challenges, but they have their nuclear power stations and generation, so it's all state-owned. They've kept the unit price at a pretty low level, so they haven't experienced the challenges we as consumers and we as businesses have over the last 18 months, 2 years with the power cost increases. And then in turn, those businesses that own our power infrastructure, or the power network delivery and the power generation haven't necessarily kept an eye on investing in that in the right way for the people of the country. They've kept an eye on investing it for their shareholders and the outcome of the dividend. So I think we're in a really interesting place, a challenging place as a country, because we don't have the control on our power networks anymore. Because we've sold it. And therefore, we can't control the cost to the consumer, to the enterprise users. And ultimately, these AI supercomputers consume huge amounts of energy. But also, we don't have the capability and capacity within the power network to really build on the next stage from where the cloud delivery deployments have got to, and take it to the next stage when AI is going to be consuming huge amounts of more energy to be able to be providing the suitable infrastructure for the next wave of success in this country. Really long answer, apologies.
No, not at all. A fascinating answer, because it leads great onto the kind of the next feel for a question here, which is, because you've spoken there about the commercial piece of energy procurement and how that is maybe out of sync with our peers across Europe. I guess my next piece of thinking here is, well, we're using energy, and the media has a certain view about data centers and what we're doing in terms of how heavy the consumption is in that space. Actually, something which Kao Data has talked extensively about. Do you feel the industry is still under fire on this topic? And what measures do you think are needed to maybe solve some of the challenges in the UK for this? What can we be doing maybe together?
Okay, well, we need as an industry to stop complaining about it and to do something about it, in my view, rather than sitting in our meeting rooms and on our data center forums, which are very closed. And it's quite a small industry. There's not many of the people that are in it have been in it for many years. Rather than complaining, we need to get out there and start addressing it directly. I think historically the industry has been very, very reticent to put its head above the parapet. And to some extent, I can understand that. I've been in positions on many occasions where our customers have insisted that we, in our legal agreements, that we're not allowed to publicly comment on whether or not those organizations reside within our data center facilities. So over the sort of last 15 years, everyone has been almost conditioned not to speak about what they do. It's a bit like working for the government in a way. You don't really mention it, you don't really talk about it, and quite frankly, probably at dinner parties and in the pub, no one really wants to hear it. But the reality is now, data centers are so intrinsically involved in everyone's day-to-day life, and we all know that when you get on your phone, you are connecting to a data center, and without that data center or that data center network, your phone won't work, your IT services through your laptop won't work, this Zoom call wouldn't work. And what we need to do is go out to people and explain that's how it is, and people don't understand that. And in addition, what data centers have replaced is making, in effect, a far more efficient outcome than how it was previously, when everyone had small computer rooms in their offices dotted around the whole of the country. When you're building these big facilities, you are doing it in a much more efficient fashion than you would do if you're building a 100 kilowatt computer room in an office block, and all the other tenants in that office block are doing exactly the same. And therefore, you're doubling up not only on required components to support it, but you're also incurring a lot more costs. So it's much more costly to do it. This is a much more efficient outcome. As an industry, I think we're doing some really good things across all aspects of it, i.e. really pushing hard on the green agenda. We just need to inform people of how that works and what we're doing to overcome the perception that we are power-hungry monsters chomping through the power infrastructure and also consuming all the water and not allowing housing developments to happen.
But apart from that, it's a good news story in the data center industry.
Yeah, it should be a good news story. It should be a good news story because it's something that really is the amount of data centers you have, the UK has the largest density of data centers outside the US. So that is a good indictment on our economy and our where we sit in the world of technology. So if you measure it in that way, it's a good position to be in. We just need to explain to people what it is we do, how it benefits them in their day-to-day lives, which they won't realize until you tell them, and what we're doing to make these buildings far more efficient.
I think you're picking up on some really good points there. And I think I was chatting to a colleague not so long back, and we were talking through, data centers are the fourth utility. And actually, when you think about it in that context, I mean, you can't do much without power and water. Yeah, granted. But actually, in this world, this environment, and as we move into the next few decades, data will become even more prevalent. We know that from what's happening today. So I'm with you. Actually, I'm a little bit on the curve that we probably just need to take stuff off the PowerPoint and into action on some of these things, and be completely transparent, which I think is a point that you made really well there.
Yeah, I mean, last week Google made their announcement about their big investment commitment in Waltham Cross in Hertfordshire.
Yeah.
And historically, they just don't do that sort of thing. So they now understand this needs to be done. They've also just acquired some land east of Waltham Cross, not far from our Harlow campus. So, they are, and again, they're making public announcements rather than trying to do it through a different company name, which they would have done in the past. They would have set up an entity that would have done the planning application for them, that would have been the front of the development, if that makes sense. And now they're realizing that's the foolish thing to do, that they should be far more open, because ultimately people need to understand what Google's doing and how good it is for the country.
I think that's a really good point. I mean, the few individuals that I've spoken to who have responsibility for, some of the big data centers around the UK and Ireland and across Europe, actually, that they really recognise that actually being transparent about what they're doing and trying to explain in a way that allows everybody to understand the impact they're having outside of the data center bunker, if you like, is actually quite powerful once you get a better understanding of it. I think I was talking to somebody from the press recently who said, if you're going to tell the world about what data centers do, make it that simple that your gran would understand it. And
Absolutely.
So I think we've got a bit of that to do as well. Look, let's take a look at technological resilience in terms of our country being ready for AI. We kind of touched on it a little bit actually already, but you've seen the Technology Secretary's plans, reboot the development of Britain's, I don't know about reboot, but Britain's data center network. I mean, in fairness, it's a positive response to some complaints, isn't it? But where do you think next tech destination? Where should it be, and where do you think it might be?
I think that the government have never really had a handle on this. I think they've always understood that if they invest in a chip manufacturer and put it into a region that's got high unemployment and that sort of thing, that's a good thing to do. It's straightforward. But I'm still not convinced they fully understand what a data center does. But there is a massive opportunity, in my opinion, to start looking at it from a national perspective and look at architecting the UK's data center network in a more measured, sustainable and pragmatic way to what has been done to date. Because what has been done to date has been completely driven by accidents. There's been no design other than large cloud providers turning up, deploying infrastructure in 3 locations, which is in a very small actual geography, which just happened to be west of London. And that was mainly down to Slough having the Slough heat and power network there. And therefore they went there because their clinics were there, and then subsequently it's grown from that. So my view, and what we're trying to work through with Tech UK at the moment, is getting to the National Infrastructure Commission and explaining to them that if we come up with a data center plan and some data center planning regulation in the UK that's advised across all the local authorities, we should start to earmark and pinpoint certain locations around the UK where there is availability of power, spare power on the grid today, with an opportunity to create alongside it green energy production with private wire connections directly to the data center areas that are allocated, special planning zones for those data center locations. So it's a simple process to get the planning approval for it. And Slough has a special planning zones for data centers as an example. And what will then happen is that all those tens of billions that are evidence that have been developed in Slough, Stockley Park and Park Royal over the last 8, 9, 10 years, and that's all from private investors, the equivalent will happen in other geographies of the UK. And all of that ecosystem that's been very successful in those locations with that investment and the subsequent jobs that are created would be evident elsewhere. Then we would take away the pressure from the southeast around London, and especially the west of London, and benefit the rest of the country with it, providing, UK physical data center resilience rather than it being in one location. And when you compare ourselves to France, they've got Marseille, they've got Paris, 2 regions. Compare ourselves to Germany, you've got Berlin and Frankfurt, 2 regions. We've only got 1. So we've acquired a data center developer in Manchester. We believe the Northwest makes sense. And that's the next stage of our evolution from a data center portfolio platform perspective.
No, well, I mean, these are really fascinating points, because when you think, did I see a stat the other day there that AI could be on track to annually consume as much electricity as the whole of Ireland?
Yeah.
Just over 29 terawatts.
I think Ireland already is the total electricity production in Ireland is being consumed. I think 15 to 20% of it's being consumed by data centers today. because they've got such a rich data center deployment out there. So yes, it wouldn't surprise me. I mean, you look at the reports from this is all happening in the US already. We generally follow the predictions. There are that a data center developed a year ago to be suitable for AI needs to have 3 times the amount of power to it. So if you put that in context, the data centers that have been developed west of London over the last 18 months are circa around 50 megawatts. So they should be, or to be AI capable, they need to be at 150 megawatts. That's huge.
To your point earlier, that might take some planning.
Well, it will take many years to be able to upgrade the power infrastructure, which has already been consumed by the cloud in those geographies, to be able to enable that today. It's going to take another 5-6 years to get to that point.
And hence, actually, your point there around maybe dispersion of data centers across the UK, wherever that is. You gave a good example of the Northwest. Could it be the Northeast? Becomes even more prevalent, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and important. And, there's geographic diversity. If you're looking at the UK from a risk perspective, you don't want all your compute, because those cloud providers are providing their compute services to enterprise, government, etc. in the UK. You want to be able to spread that risk, from a UK resilience perspective. It makes sense.
So we've spoken quite a bit here about resilience. We've spoken a bit about what we need to do as an industry, and the dawn of AI. I mean, the dawn, maybe we're into mid-morning more than the dawn, but some of the things that I personally feel quite passionate about are talent and the kind of different layers of talent that we're going to need to help support us, both in both of our businesses, actually, but in the industry total. If you reflect on your career, which was taking a bit of a snaky, windy road to where you are today, what advice would you give to young people thinking about a career in tech? Let's leave that one there. What would be your guidance?
I would probably recommend that they look at an apprenticeship opportunity if they can, rather than going to university and doing a degree that might not have much to do with the organisation or the interests that they have, or where they end up going from a tech perspective. Doing a computer science degree, I don't know, is necessarily going to be really helpful in the world that we work within. I think getting involved in the industry when you're younger will be very helpful for your future career development if you want to. I think often people are slightly confused about what data center developer operators do. Often it's assumed that we are doing IT of some description, but we're not. We are a plethora of real estate to design, engineering, construction, and then you've got all the professional teams that sit around it, cost consultants, you've got the legal teams. I mean, it's a vast array of almost traditional skills rather than what would be perceived to be, working for Amazon or Google with the techie application type work. So you could go and do a QS, quantity surveyors qualification at university and get into the data center industry. And then I think there's a real opportunity to do a vast variety of jobs that will come from that. And I think it's a great place to go if you are, 21, 22 years old, because I think the world is at your feet somewhat compared to other industries where you're probably going to be shoehorned into a particular area.
That was a fascinating kind of resume of what people could really be involved in our industry. It doesn't dawn on you until you actually kind of lay it out, the different roles that are needed to build and operate data centers.
Absolutely. I mean, what Kao Data and organizations of our type do is across all aspects of delivering a mechanical and electrical solution that provides power and cooling to our customers' servers. And everything that sits behind that is a vast array of skill sets and professional people across different professional disciplines that enable that to happen. And I've often thought about, can I chart that? Can I put down on a slide all the different professional disciplines and all the skill sets and all, the architects, the QSs, the lawyers, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the list will be extensive, and without one of those, it doesn't work. So and I have the opportunity, which I'm very fortunate to have, to somewhat work across all of those. I am not in any way a master of anything. I know a bit about it all. It's supposed to be the best way of describing it. But it's fascinating to be able to sit there and see all aspects of it as you go through that early stage development, actually acquiring some land, to then having a completed data center building when customers move in and they're installing their servers. It's a long journey.
Yeah. Yes, it is. I can vouch for that piece. And on one final point, because we talk about all those disciplines, all those professionals needed to make it happen. Is there a better bit of work that we can do collectively, you think, as an industry to attract people to it?
Yes, I think I'd like to see at career when people go for a career advice or career talks at events and that sort of thing, there's a data center stand there explaining to people, well, firstly, what a data center is and all the areas that it covers, for example. That would be fantastic. I mean, I feel that we actually could be called an industry rather than telling everyone that we are an industry.
Yeah, how about that? So there's a bit of a narrative change needed there.
Yeah.
Spencer, I just wanted to say thank you for giving up your time today. I've really enjoyed this conversation talking about AI, investment, government plans, investment from all areas of our industry, actually, and giving us some guidance on what you feel we could do better in the industry, both from a diverse location perspective and also from a skills and talent viewpoint as well. Spencer, thank you for joining me today.
An absolute pleasure. Thank you for your time.